So, welcome. You came here today, you clicked on this video, I salute you. What an interesting choice in life you made. You're here because this is a tutorial about how to make bistro curtains, also known as kitchen curtains or half-height curtains, inset window curtains. Oh, so many names, so much potential for SEO. But I'm going to refer to them as bistro curtains because I think that sounds the fanciest. So you came here because you want to know about bistro curtains. And I'm going to tell you, I am a hobby sewist, so I'm by no means a professional, but I think I did a really good job, and I think that the world should get to see that. Coffee is so good. Let's start off with what you'll need. For this project, you're going to need your fabric. I chose 100% cotton. You can also do a cotton linen blend or 100% linen. It just needs to have zero stretch, and it needs to be a fairly light color so that you're able to get light through the curtain still. This is not meant to be a blackout curtain. It's meant to be something that's kind of closed throughout the day. So it's something that lets light in while providing you with privacy. So you're going to need your fabric. I'll tell you how I calculated mine in a second. In addition to the fabric, you're of course going to need thread, and you're going to need your curtain rod. I said this was a renter-friendly project. That's because my curtain rod is actually a shower rod. It's the shower rod from IKEA. Sorry, I keep looking over there because I can see it to my side, but I'm going to pay attention to you because you're the one that clicked on the video. The curtain isn't a sentient being. It doesn't know I'm looking at it. I used an IKEA shower rod. That's because it's actually held up by tension. You adjust the height and the sides then get all the pressure and stay up. So you don't have to use any screws. We currently don't have a drill, so that's why we did this. And yeah, I thought it was a great renter-friendly option. In this project, I made my own loops. If you're not going to make your own loops, you'll also need to have purchased those loops. But yeah, so that's what you need. My inspiration were these 4 photos, and quite honestly, guys, a fire alarm just went off. I don't think it was my fire alarm. I think it was the fire alarm in the building. It went for like 2 beeps and then it stopped. Oh, I just got a message. I need it. Focus. Sorry, for some reason I thought that the message might be related to the fire alarm, and that would make no sense. But so there was a fire alarm in my building. When I went outside like 5 minutes ago, it did smell a lot like cigarettes in the hallway. So fuck me, I don't know. Anyway, let's get back to this. Where was I? So you're going to need your fabric, your curtain, hooks. Oh yeah, my inspiration were these 4 photos. And also Paige Wazzle's videos, but that's just a general life inspiration and not related to this at all. That's my inspiration. And let's talk about how I worked out how much fabric I need. I did that by first measuring the length of my window. For me, that was 175 centimeters. From there, I knew I wanted 40 centimeters additional fabric in that length to create a wave pattern and make sure that it wasn't pulled tight. So I knew that I needed then at least 215 centimeters. I also am making the loops myself, and I'm making them out of the matching fabric. Honestly, it wasn't planned, but I also then have the fabric to make those loops as additional fabric. So for me, I needed 2.5 meters of fabric once I'd done all those calculations. My window's full height is 110 centimeters. Half of that, therefore, is 55 centimeters. So the fabric needed to be 55 centimeters plus 3 centimeters seam allowance at the base and 25 centimeters seam allowance at the top. The 25 centimeters is because I wanted a really thick hem at the top. It was a stylistic choice. You don't have to do as thick of a hem. If you want to make it so actually that the curtain rod goes through the curtain itself, you need to make sure that that hem will be bigger, more than the circumference of the rod itself. we can talk about that later, I guess, if I remember. If I don't, I'm so sorry. The fabric I got, I think this fabric's about 140 centimeters in width. So I knew I had more than enough. So that was me, 2.5 meters. Depending on your curtain, that might change slightly. So that's that. Let's get into making the actual curtain. This is the first step. We're going to make the height of the curtain. So my first part was folding the fabric in half. I did this because my table was too small, and then I pinned it so that it didn't slip. From here, I measured the length of the fabric. So I mentioned before my curtain is 54 centimeters. I then added 3 centimeters and an additional 25 centimeters to that. And I just marked that on the fabric using chalk. I did that measurement a couple of times across the fabric to make sure that the line would be straight, the same way you would draw a margin when you were in primary school. And that's me doing this. Isn't that fascinating? I'm doing such a great job. You should all be very proud of me. I'm very bad at drawing a straight line. Once I've done this step, we're going to cut the fabric. I know, very exciting times. I lie. The next thing is I then draw that, I put several more marks along here to make sure that I can follow that line very easily when I cut it. Making sure that the fabric is laying on the table, I cut along that line. And I held the fabric as I went so that the fabric didn't slip and stuff up what I was doing. So that's what we're doing here. Now we're on to step 2. Step 2 is making the width of my fabric. So what I did was I actually, once again, folded my fabric in half, and I measured it so that there was 35 centimeters left on the edge, because I had 250 centimeters of fabric, and that minus 215 was 35. And then once I did that, I cut along that line. That's my scrap fabric. I'm going to be using that later for the loops. Now I'm going to make the hem. I did this by doing a double fold along the edges to make sure that the hem was very neat and you wouldn't see any fraying, because this isn't something that's going to be hidden within clothing. This will also be out for the public to see. I did this on both sides. Just make sure when you're doing it that the right sides are facing down on the table and that you're pinning both sides to the wrong side. I actually don't know what the inside of the fabric's called, because you always just say right sides together. Once again, my fabric was folded in half. So I did this along the edges and then I sewed. That's right. Get excited. We're sewing. I know you cannot tell by the sound of my voice, but this is by far my favorite part of a project. So for the sewing, I did a straight stitch. The length of the stitch is 4 and the tension is 6. I did this because this was my setting for my last project, and I almost exclusively use zero stretch cotton or linen. And so I kind of just forgot to check that that was correct, and it seemed to work fine for me. If you're not sure how to set the tension or the stitch length, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you. I didn't demonstrate that, so I'm not going to explain it. But just make sure that you do a couple practice stitches on some scrap fabric to make sure that the stitch will be okay and to avoid having to unpick the fabric. Now we're hemming the bottom of the fabric. The bottom of the fabric is the exact same thing. We're doing a double fold along the edges and then we're pinning them. And then we're sewing them. Exact same thing, a straight stitch along the edge. Just make sure you do a back stitch to close it off at the beginning and the end. And you're good as gold, as Sheena would say. Good, yeah, that's how that song goes. Good as gold. I was probably just as in pitch as she was. I don't know why Sheena's catching a stray. I'm sorry. Okay, guys, I'm just stepping in here quickly to check on you, make sure you're doing okay, making sure you're having fun, remembering that this isn't that serious at the end of the day. It's just a curtain. You can always redo it or get someone else to do this task for you. It's life. I also have some unfortunate news for those of you who are making your own loops. We need to do some maths right now. If you are not making your own loops, you can actually just skip to this timestamp and continue on with the project. But for those of us who are making the loops, this is what you need to do. You first need to measure the length of your fabric. So once again, for me, that was 215 centimeters. And then you need to divide, well, minus the hems, it probably came closer to 210. So let's say I had 210 centimeters of fabric. From there, I need to work. The first step is going to be working out how many loops we need. So my fabric is probably around 210 centimeters once we account for the hems I've made on the sides. I wanted my loops to be roughly 15 centimeters apart. You can, of course, adjust this number. I wouldn't probably go less than 10 centimeters or more than 18 centimeters in distance between each of them, because if it's 10 centimeters, it's going to be a lot of loops. And if it's more, like let's say 20 centimeters, you're going to start to get sags rather than that kind of upright wave that you're looking for with a curtain. So for me, that number, once I did all my math, was 12 loops. My leftover fabric that I have is roughly 40 centimeters because, give or take the measurements, they gave me a little extra, it doesn't matter. So I have about 40 centimeters of fabric. I measured the circumference of my rod and I knew that my loops needed to be more than 6 inches, I think. And sorry, I go between metric and imperial a lot. It's for no reason other than that the imperial numbers are larger on the measuring tape, so it's just easier for me at a quick glance. But 6 centimeters, that's probably like 6 inches, that's probably like 15 centimeters, plus a little bit for the hem. So let's say these are probably 20 centimeters. So I knew I needed 12 loops. I knew that I wanted them to be probably about just over an inch wide, or 2.5, 3 centimeters wide. Do you reckon that's 2.5, 3? It doesn't matter. So that's 6 centimeters plus seam allowance, so it's probably 8 centimeters. So I know that my fabric is 40 centimeters. I have 40 centimeters of fabric, and I know that I need 12 of these, so I need to make sure that I can get 12 out of that 40 centimeters. I know that the width of them is 8 centimeters. And after I've measured the circumference around my rod, the height actually of my fabric would fit 3 of them. I knew that I could fit 3 for the total length, and I knew that they would each take up 8 centimeters. I have 40 centimeters of fabric. So what I need to do is I need to divide 40 by 8, which gives me 5. I then times that number by 3, so I get 15. So I know that with 40 centimeters of fabric, as long as if each strap is 8 centimeters wide and fits on the fabric 3 times, that I'm going to get 15 pieces, basically. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. It's very hard to just verbally explain maths, and I haven't done maths since I was 15. But I did it, okay? We worked it out. So I knew I would have enough. In fact, I actually had slightly too many. So I was like, great, I've got a couple spares if I need them. So let's just have a look at how I did that process right here. Now we're on to, as I just mentioned, the math portion of the evening or the day. You could be watching this at any point. So this is me measuring the length that I want the loops to be. I then looked at my tape measure for way too long. I was really confused about something. could not for the life of you tell me what that was. It was probably because I kept using imperial and metric, and that just really stuffed up my brain. So that's really on me. But I knew, as I said previously, that I would be able to fit the length of 3 loops on each piece of fabric, and I wanted them to each be 8 centimeters. So the first thing I did was I measured the length. This is me working out that amazingly I can fit 3. Yep, that's me measuring things. Now that I've measured the length, the height of these loops, I'm measuring the width. And this is me going along every 8 centimeters and just making a mark in the fabric and then cutting across that line. I used the line in the fabric as my guide. If you don't have a striped fabric, of course, just draw that line along yourself with using chalk or fabric marker or, yep, those are the 2 things someone would use. So that's me cutting them. My last one actually was a slightly bit wider and I was too lazy to make it the same as all the others. Don't know why I did that, because then it just means that loop is wider than the other loops. But I did that and I don't have an excuse. I just did that, and then that's me checking, yep, okay, they're all the same. I then took my loops, I folded it in half and I pinned it along the edges. I made sure that it was inside out, so actually the right sides are facing. And then I sewed along. Once I sewed my straight stitch along the length of it, I then sewed 1 stitch along the top of the fabric. I didn't close this stitch off because I actually unpicked it after I did this step. You don't have to do that, I just wanted to. I took a pencil and I just pressed it against that stitch I just did, and I pushed the fabric through to turn it the correct way around. I'm really sorry that this is the angle that I did this at, but hopefully what I'm saying helps to explain it a little bit better for you. So that is how I made each of my loops. I repeated that for all of them, and then I cut them into thirds. Folks, between you and me, we've reached almost the end. We are at the final countdown of steps. We're at our last step. We're adding the loops to the top. And I'm going to explain how I did that while you look at it. Okay, now, as I just mentioned, we're on to our final step, which is creating the hem along the top. So the first thing I did was I measured from the base 54 centimeters, and then I pinned the fabric there. I didn't adjust this 54 centimeters for the hem, because the top hem, because I knew that I would need to fold the hem in a bit, and by doing that I would then lose some of that. So, and the loops, and I knew that the loops would account for what I had lost. Once I did that, I then cut along the edge. Now, this is very important. Listen very carefully. If you are not making your own loops, you do not cut along that hem, okay? You just don't. Once I had, for those of you who are doing the loops, once I had cut along that hem, I folded it in on itself and pinned it the whole way along. I did this before adding the loops because it was just a bit neater and a bit easier. And from the next step I did was I took my loops and I, from the center point of the loop, measured 15 centimeters along and added all of my loops. I don't know why, as I just mentioned before, I don't know why, but I didn't film the final step. So you're going to see me here explaining what I did. If you are not making these loops, then all you need to do is take the rod and slide it through your top hem. You can choose how much fringe you have at the top. You could have no fringe and simply sew your hem tight along the edge of the rod, or you can have a bit of a fringe at the top. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but I did not film me sewing this last part. But basically, after I'd pinned everything was in place, I had to I sewed 2 straight stitches at the top and 1 straight stitch at the bottom for the hem of the bottom. Once I did that, I just slid the curtain onto my rod, I put it up in my window, and then I continued living my life, if I'm really honest with you. And I think that's it. That's really that's that with the curtain. So if you have questions, put them in the comments. I'm happy to try and answer them. If I can't answer them, someone on the internet will have answered them, most likely on Quora or Reddit. And that's it, yeah, TTYL.